with the governors that we have today, they don't believe prisoners deserve anything.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of I Know This Guy, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of some of the most interesting people I know. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to I Know This Guy wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, my kids want me to say something about ringing a bell. What the hell's a bell?
All right. So, Dad, who do you have lined up for the podcast?
Well, do you remember Marcelo Bratke?
Of course I do.
Crazy story. I mean, there should be a movie about it, right?
Yeah. Let's get the director in on this.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, we are going to be interviewing his wife, Mariannita Luzzati, and she is a visual artist, a world-renowned visual artist.
Very cool. Can't
So
wait for this.
I can't wait to get started.
Yeah, let's dive in.
We shall. All right, so let's get started. So Mariannita, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, I am so honored to have you. I've heard so much about you. And I got to tell you, your husband is probably one of the nicest guys I've ever met and one of the most interesting people. Like, we have interesting people on this podcast, but my jaw was dropping when I was hearing some of the stories that he had. So, yeah, it was fantastic. So now he actually reached out to us and said, "Oh, you should, talk to my wife." And anyways, I know a little bit about your backstory, but I'd really love to know what makes you you.
I think I was a very lonely child. So since the beginning, I have difficulties in adapting to school until I was about 7 years old. And so I turned to draw and paint. And so I spent a lot of my childhood doing the things I'm still doing now. So I think what transformed me in myself was this period that I always remember when I was a child, that spending time alone and discovering things alone through my experiments in drawings and paintings and objects that I used to do myself without orientation, really. So I think this is my most important background, the discoveries I made alone.
So you didn't have a formal training in art?
No, then after I had a training in art, but when I was 19 years old, I started to do courses and I had wonderful teachers, but I haven't been to an art university.
Interesting. So I guess as a child, where did you focus your talents on within your art? What type of genre? What were you looking at? Was it the environment?
When I was a child, I was very much interested in going to museums, and I loved to spend hours looking at things. And what really interested me was always the landscapes of distant places and all the landscapes painted by the Brazilians painters from the beginning of the century, about the tropical forests or the history of the discovery of Brazil. This was my main interest at the time. Then I developed later this taste for the landscape and nature. And my whole work now has completely transformed about, so it's always about nature and landscape and things that I discovered through this observation as well.
If I understand correctly, this is going back to the last podcast I had with Marcelo. He was saying that you live in a gorgeous area of Brazil. Is that one of the reasons why you're there?
I don't know if Marcelo told you, but we live between São Paulo and London. So we spend times in between these two places. São Paulo is São Paulo. It's a huge city, not beautiful, not green, an industrial city. But when I am in Brazil, I try to spend some periods on my family house in the mountains near São Paulo. And here you have a beautiful nature and beautiful landscapes. And since the beginning of the pandemic, we are here at the mountain.
I think that's what he was referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, you've got a long ways to go to work sometimes, huh?
Yes.
So, what do you think between Sao Paulo, it's so hard for me to say, and London? There's got to be just incredible changes and, just differences between the two, of course, culturally. What do you like?
It's completely different, really. But I think London is a huge city as well, but much calmer than São Paulo. And I think I can have a more quality life in London because it's a very green city and English people are very attached to nature and you are surrounded by nature in London. São Paulo, it's a different thing. So you have an industrial city with trees, but things change all the time. And so you have constructions all the time and destroying green areas just to do developing things. So it's a completely different way of life. But Brazil has a wonderful nature, not in São Paulo, but the surroundings of São Paulo and in the place where I am now, in the mountains of Mantiqueira Mountains, you have wonderful, wonderful nature and trees and very wild nature. This is a thing that I miss when I am in England because you don't have a wild nature anymore. In Europe, you have everything is planted, and so everything looks the same. Here in Brazil, if you move from where I am now in the Mantiqueiras to the Amazon, you see a completely different sort of animals, trees, birds, and everything changes. And this is very interesting. This is very alive.
I want to go a little bit further back. So we talked about you going to university, and can we talk a bit more about either during university or after university, your first jobs? What did you do to get where you are now?
For me, the changing of my starting career was I was being trained as an artist, but into a studio of another artist. So I haven't been to a formal university, but I did many courses through artists, living artists in Brazil, that they used to open their studios for young artists to come and be with them for a period, like in the old ages. And so we got experience through this period together into the studios. And I did this with a wonderful teacher for engraving that was called Evandro Jardim. Then my major teacher was Carlos Fajardo. He is an artist who had this course at his studio. So I used to go there every day to work on my works, and he would analyze. And in one of these periods, I got a very important prize in Brazil, and it was the first prize for a painter in Brasilia. And as soon as I got that prize, I was hired by a gallery in São Paulo. And so I started my career of exhibitions and showing in museums and selling my work. And this was the beginning of everything. And so I started to develop, let's say, my style, my preferences into my art. And I started with engraving and painting, but I do a lot of video as well. I do a lot of collaborations with music, with Marcelo, and we do a show together where I have a projection of a film, and he plays in a place like a cinema. We do this a stage like cinema in a theater, with my film on the background and his music. And we had many tours with this format concert. And so I love to experiment things. So I'm always trying something new. And I like very much to work with like theater and art and music. I have a project with Marcelo and one actor as well, where we work together in a stage where we have a film, the actor reading poetry, Marcelo playing piano. So I love this kind of collaboration.
So before you were talking about going and performing with Marcelo, were you talking about Cinemusica?
Cinemusica, yes. I created Cinemusica. I created
Oh, okay.
yes, because I always wanted to do something with prisons in Brazil. And so I created Cinemusica to bring nature inside of the prisons. And we created this concert where I had this huge screen on the background of a room in one of the prisons, for example, where we have been, and Marcelo with his grand piano in front of this screen. So Marcelo would play pieces by Villa-Lobos inspired by nature, and on the background I would project many natures from Brazil, like the forests of the Amazon or the Pantanal, the seascapes. So for the prisoners to be able to feel nature again where they are, because prisons in Brazil are in a very hard environment, and they don't have contact with nature. And I believe if you don't have contact with nature, you cannot recuperate yourself and be reintegrated again to society. So nature, I think it's a very important step for you to regrow feelings and rethink life. So, and we had this experience in 10 prisons in the state of São Paulo. After that, we did this concert in many theaters as well, but with normal public, not prisoners, just.
How did the prisoners react?
Oh, they love it because, it was an open project where they could go if they want. They were not obliged to attend the concert. But since the beginning, they were so excited of receiving this into their home, no, that they would prepare the rooms for us. So we would arrive with the piano, the screen, and the projector on the morning, and we would work together to prepare the room for the show for the night. So we would spend the day arranging the seats and arranging everything. And it was a wonderful experience for us and for them to make part of organizing this thing. And on the time of the concert, they would come like 10, then 20, then 30, then one would go out and to call the others. And at the end, we had a full house, and they would sing along the songs of Villa Lobos. They would cry. They used to cry when they see the scenes of the sea or the forest. It was a very emotional thing, and they reacted very well. And the background we had from many directors from the prisons after we passed through this was that for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they were much calmer and focused on their jobs there. And it was a very positive background for us too. And we received many letters from them after that, saying how important was for them to receive a project because they were not used to receive anything. It was really a really beautiful project. I love it, really. And on the theaters, when we do this project, it's very interesting because we attract people that are not used to classical music because of the visual part. Because of the music, we would attract people from classical music that are not used to contemporary art. So it was a mixed public, very interesting. And I believe everything has to be mixed. I am against of doing just a traditional thing. I think it's very interesting to open to public and to have diversity as a public.
So how do you look at mixed mediums in your work, or how do you go from, even for Camerata Brazil, like, do you start with the images and then think of the music you'd like to go with it, or is it collaborative process?
No, it's a collaborative. It's a collaborative. We think about the composer that Marcelo will focus.
Yep.
So, for example, for Ernesto Nazaré, and we start with the selection of the music. Marcelo selects the music, he does the arrangement, and then with the music, I think the images. But working with music, it has to be very subtle because images can disturb the music.
Yeah.
And for example, when you have many musicians like the camerata and the piano, I have to be very careful. It has to be an image that you don't even notice the moving. Everything has to move in a way together with the music and in a very soft way, because you cannot be disturbed with many movements or many images invading the music. So this is what I understood after the first Cinemusica, is this very subtle thing that has to be. So I do, I think, 100 editings until the film is complete.
Wow.
Right.
Sometimes we start the tour with a film and we finish with another one, because after a concert, I have to change that little bit. Then I have to change a little bit more. So it's an open thing that I'm always working on, because when you listen to a concert, watching to something, after many times watching the film, you see what works and what doesn't work. It's a very it's an experimental thing, but has to be really the right thing, and there is the point where it has to be perfect, really.
Right.
I almost see it as becoming one.
Yes.
And just the flow of the music.
You are absolutely right, because you don't have to notice that the film is invading the music. It has to work with the music.
When you did Cinemusica in prison, and then you went to a theater to show this to the general public, did you get the same reaction or did you get a completely different reaction?
Yeah, it's funny because in a standard concert, people would clap between the music, and they are more alive during the performance. But when you have the Cinemusic format, it's a completely different, because you have a dark room like a cinema, and they are all completely silent from beginning to the end, because you have the projection at the background with the darkness of the room. So they respect this entire concert from beginning to the end without doing any noise, and they just clap when it finishes. So this is a completely different audience, really.
You said that you went to 10 different prisons in Brazil. Do you have any plans to expand that out, even outside of Brazil?
Oh, I would love to do that. But today we have different laws in Brazil. And I don't think we would be able to do it again here, because you cannot enter. And we were very criticized here because we did this, and saying, oh, you should do this into prisons. And so the government at the time was very for this project. But with the governors that we have today, they don't believe prisoners deserve anything. So I think we won't be able to do it here.
It's a real pet peeve of mine, especially when you're looking at reform. I can't see it hurting anything trying to humanize people.
Oh, of course, but
Yeah.
they say, oh, they did so many crimes, so why we should bring something for them? They have to, this kind of mentality, and it's very bad. But I believe they should receive many projects into the prisons, and they should be able to work artistically as well. We had wonderful experiences. In one of the prisons we have been, when we arrived, one of the prisoners arranged an exhibition about their works. And it was a very interesting experience for me to analyze all the works there, because they knew I was a visual artist, so they wanted to show me, and it was we changed ideas. It was really rich for them and for me as well. And I think we have to exchange things, good things, with people, no matter if they are in prison or outside. They are the same for me.
Yeah, especially when you're doing something like that, or like you said, an arts project, or just giving somebody some form of worth, you'll probably see the hostility. I'm not a psychologist, but I would think that if you can remove the tension by doing something that they like, and also providing them with something to do instead of boredom, I would think that would be a huge benefit, not only to violence, but when they get out.
Oh, of course. And they learn things as well. The sad thing in Brazil is that the prisoners, they stay locked there without doing anything. They don't have schools inside the prisons. They don't have any training. Very few of them can work in small things. So they go out without anything. So they cannot develop a career while they are in prison. It's very sad, very sad.
We're so backwards, and it's not just Brazil, it's most countries around the world. I mean, I've seen some of the Scandinavian prisons and their models. I've seen some really interesting models here in Canada that actually let prisoners go out and do shopping. It's almost like an apartment that they have, or a townhouse with a few people. They do their own cooking. It's not a halfway house.
But this is very good, of course. Of course. I saw a documentary once about a prison in India. It was not a prison, it was like a village where prisoners would go with their families. So they would stay on that village for a period of 2 years, 3 years, I don't know, depending of the crime they committed, but with their families. So the families would go along, and it's a kind of punishment for the families as well, but they have to go through this together. And it was very interesting because they would go out with other values as well, and they would work as a community on the place, and they were not locked. They were just like in a village with houses, but they cannot go out from the village.
Yeah, I'd really like to have a guest on, or a couple of people, maybe from the private prison side of things to the just different people representing different, maybe even some people that were in prison on this podcast, and just kind of have an interesting chat. I mean, we could talk for hours on that.
Yeah, of course, because
Yeah.
they know exactly what works and what doesn't work, of course.
Be interesting, just because you really do want to have all sides. But I mean, my last comment, again, like overcrowding people into oneself for 23 hours a day, or possibly even worse, putting a person, no windows basically, into a cell for 23 hours a day is not going to reform anybody. It's just, no. It's in Canada, it's actually, I don't even like having that in Canada, but from what I understand, it's 30 days. But some people just can't do it. And their prison, get this, oh my gosh. So I saw this documentary where this guy, he went into jail for some reason. He ended up being convicted. He ended up in prison. He got into a fight with somebody. He had no choice but to get into the fight. So they gave him a 2-week sentence. And within the 2 weeks of being locked up in solitary, he went kind of crazy, and he got another 2 weeks. And then, because he couldn't stand it, he did something else. Anyways, he got up to about 3 months, and he tried to commit suicide. So what do? They give him more time. He was up to about 3 years because he couldn't take it. Like, some people, they can. Anyways, I know we're going down a completely different rabbit hole here, but when we start talking about that, I kind of get heated a little. But yeah, it's crazy.
No, of course. But also, if you are locked for 23 hours a day, it's ridiculous. You don't have contact with the world and with the reality. So you are living in another. It's horrible, really horrible.
Okay, so I understand that you have a quote that you love. What is it?
It's a quote by David Hockney. He's very attached to nature, and he came back to live in England some years ago, and he started to think about the trees of England and the forests, because he missed so much nature, the English nature. And he did a quote. It was about, I think, nothing in nature stays the same for even a moment, I think. It was something like that. Yes. But this quote is very interesting, because he was telling once that he was painting a forest. He went to these woods, and with his brushes and everything, and started to paint a work about that trees. The day after, he went to the same place to finish the painting, and all the trees were chopped down.
Oh.
Yes. And so I think there is a double sense into this phrase. It doesn't stay the same. It doesn't stay because nature changes all the time. If you are in the middle of the woods now, in a moment, a wind would come and would change everything, or the sunlight, everything changed. but everything changed as well because of human action as well, no?
When I was living in Hawaii, one of the things I loved doing was just going down to the water, and almost every night, and I'd sit there for about an hour, and it's water, but just like this says, it changes every second, and it was so calm and so peaceful. That was my time alone, that I could just sit out there and just be at peace. Like I've never lived on water before, but it was kind of interesting because the ocean had its own personality every day.
The ocean is like a fire, no, that changes and moves all the time. It's very, very, I love the ocean. And I think Hawaii must be very interesting in terms of nature, no? Flowers and trees, yes.
Oh,
I know, Mariannita, you mentioned you wanted to talk about the forest fires in Brazil. I think that can relate to, the nature changing and the issue with people intervening with nature. Do you want to speak about the forest fires in Brazil?
Because we are having this problem with the farmers here in Brazil. And so they burn the land for to create food for the cows. They burn everything so that the green grass will grow again, and then they have this free, they believe they have this food for free for some period, but after you burn and burn and burn, nothing grows back on that land. And so you have this wasted land all around the Amazon and the Pantanal, where you had huge fires. I think you have heard about this, no?
Yeah.
The
yes.
fires, not just in the Amazon, but in the Pantanal. And it's so sad. It's so sad. Here in the mountains, we had some fires as well. They burn all the woods because they want to construct. So they burn from down to up in a way that when the firemen come, they cannot turn the fire out. It's impossible. It's really horrible. We had fires here in the mountain for a month in front of our house, and it was impossible, really. The fire brigade would come with water and spend hours, and then the fire started again, because it's the way they do, it's impossible to turn the fire out. And in Pantanal, this year, we had the huge fires in history, and we lost many animals and forests. It's very sad, and I think it's terrible what's going on in Brazil now. It's something that makes me feel that I don't want to live here anymore, because it's this respect for nature and for human beings. It's horrible, really. And I think the world has to do something about, because we cannot have these in places like the Amazon and Pantanal, that are places so important for the world. All these fires are changing the climate, not just in Brazil, but further on.
It's interesting. I saw a documentary a little while ago, and it's just history repeating itself. They were talking about, well, for years, hundreds of years, they're trying to figure out what happened to the Mayans. And the documentary said it was due to clearing land.
Really?
That was the cause of the downfall of the Mayan civilization.
Oh,
and
amazing.
It was very, very interesting. Just a concept that I never really thought about before. But they went back and they were talking about how they were clearing their land, and they cleared so much land to make room for these cities and to make room for exactly what we're talking about, for agriculture.
Yes,
That they were
agriculture.
clearing it for grass and grain. And
Yes.
what ended up happening is they just wiped out their society.
But because the Mayas, they were very, very great agriculturists. So
Yes.
they had many plantations and everything. But in Brazil, everything is turning to soya. So the Amazon is turning to soya or meat, and it's very sad. It's very sad. When you fly to the Amazon, and we did this many times, you see many fires from the window of the airplane. You can see many fires going on, but now it's huge. It's too big. We cannot go back anymore because we lost many pieces. So it's very, very sad. And for the indigenous people living there, it's very sad because they are losing everything. And sickness arrives as well. We had a horrible episode of yellow fever some years ago because of it, because of the fires, because of pollution. So we have a lot of things are happening again, like the yellow fever is coming back again in Brazil because of this, because we don't have this nature equilibrium anymore.
And like you were saying before, with that amount of fires burning, what will it do to the climate?
Of course.
Not to say that just the ecosystem, just burning out species we may not. I mean, we don't even know exist. In some areas.
Yes, and it was so sad to see the images of all the animals in Pantanal burned. It was really, really, really sad. It was horrible.
I don't know what's going on. This year is a crazy year, but look at the Australian fires. Canada's had crazy fires too, California and Colorado. And, we're talking, about Brazil now, but these wildfires, and what ticks me off, especially where you are, it's man-made. It's not, because of a lightning strike or anything like that.
No. But in Canada, you had fires because it was criminal fires or not?
It could be, but most likely because of dry weather. And it could have been a lightning strike. Typically, I haven't heard of not that it's reported anyways, like it could be an accidental fire. The big one that's happening, or one of the big ones that happened in the United States, was due to a gender reveal.
Really?
A gender reveal. They had fireworks, and okay, so that's worth wiping out so many, thousands of acres, so you could reveal whether you had a boy or a girl. It's just crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Crazy, really, yes.
But anyways, let's talk about a comment that you made that I thought was pretty interesting. And I think the name of this website, I'm going to pronounce it right, is japillings.com. And this was interesting, that you love it when people criticize you. It says, I love it when I am criticized. I believe that opening discussions about my works is always interesting and productive, and it makes me reflect on what I'm doing. I love it.
Yes, you know why? I think when you are criticized, you look at your work in a different way. And you are not in a way that you are not used, and so you open discussions to yourself as well, and it's very interesting. I really love the discussion about being criticized. When I am criticized, I love this discussion. I used to work with an art dealer, a German art dealer in Brazil. That was very interesting because he used to criticize me a lot. And I loved these discussions because you find other ways and you never accommodate yourself as well. Because, listen that you are doing wonderful things, compliments doesn't bring you anything, but critics, yes. And you can look at you in a different way, at your work in a different way. And I love losing stability and embarking in new discoveries as well. So I think critics about my work are able to bring me this instability that is very important for my work.
Have you always been like that, or has this evolved over time?
No, I think I always been like that. I think I was trained when I was studying with one of the artists, Carlos Fazzardo. He used to put all the artists around their works and asking each one to criticize the other one. So I think I learned to do. I think the criticizing the other one is a way of looking to yourself as well. So I think it's interesting. I love, and I think it came from my studies. This.
Yeah, in the same article, you also had another really great quote, and it was, "These images' success, viewers should contemplate and reflect on emptiness and silence, which for me is our greatest need today." Can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, I think we have a lot of noise visually and sound noise everywhere, and silence is something that I'm always looking for into my work. So I want people to feel this silence when they watch my work. And I think for me it's important to have this moment of contemplation and where you are dig into an image, and like if you are in the middle of the woods contemplating the landscape just with natural sounds. I think the world is too noisy, but in every sense. And it is important to have this silence. I think people forget to have the silence. And I always say to Marcelo that for him it's important to live with silence as well, because he's a musician, and so he's always either practicing his piano or listen to others' music. But sometimes listen to nothing and just being in silence. It's very important because you discover other things and you leave other things come to you. And silence is something that people are not using and don't want to be into today.
One of the things I'm really worried about here is when, and it might sound stupid, but when Amazon has the drones, and it's just going to be, like, especially in the cities, but I don't want to hear drones buzzing around and dropping off packages. No, it's going to drive me crazy. So, what are your thoughts? I touched on COVID and just kind of my experience in a positive way, actually. But what are your thoughts on how women have been affected by COVID?
You know, I was reading about that, and it's something that worries me a lot because COVID brought a strength for women, especially with women with children, because all the women had to be home with their children. All the schools were closed here in Brazil and in England as well. And when people started to come back to work, just the ones that didn't have children came back, because until the schools are open in Brazil, the schools are still closed now, and women cannot go back to work. So it's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation, and I imagine if you have an employee which is a woman with small children, and you think, oh, a pandemic can happen again, so I may not hire a woman anymore. And I think this is something that is happening now. People are afraid of having women working for them, and I think we will be back 10 years in our achievement in society.
Now that you say that, there might be, yeah, there definitely would probably be that effect. yeah, a trickle down effect. But yeah, it's weird. I've never thought of Hayden. Have you ever thought of it that way?
No. I mean, on top of that too, like even we were just talking about silence, and I can't even imagine the mental pressure of if you're able to work from home with all your young kids also tending to their needs 24/7, maybe not even being able to return to a job afterwards, or like, yeah, that's a totally
Yeah,
cool
yeah,
perspective.
especially in Brazil, many people are not returning to their offices anymore
Mhm. Right.
because the offices are closing, or they are giving back their offices and people are just working from home. And so it's a situation that may last many years. And we don't know yet when schools will return normally. I think it's something that we'll have to think about this in the future. And it's changing now. I feel people are worried with of having women working with them because of it. And I think this will change a lot, really, the position of woman into society.
We did a podcast on my other podcast
Mm?
about COVID suicide. And so
Oh,
how many
really?
people, yeah, how many people were dying from depression and anxiety, taking their own lives, which especially the people that we knew, um, they wouldn't, I don't think, I think COVID completely changed their mental health. And, we started talking to other people, and it was like everybody knew somebody that took their life. And there's one lady, she was a business person in Poland. She knew 5 people who committed suicide.
Really? Oh, I
Yes.
haven't heard this suicide during COVID. Mm.
Yeah. So it's a whole other topic that, we haven't really touched on, but mental health and again, men and women, but I can especially see that if you've got to take it, and I'm just saying this in general, but if you're taking care of a family, if you have to be the superwoman, which so many women still are, they take on that role doing, cooking. Maybe, there is the
Yes.
50-50. A lot of the time, all around the world, you'll see that woman that has that extra burden that we don't talk about.
It's true. It's true. And you have to take care of the elderly as well. And you have to take
Yes.
care of the house and everything. You organize everything. It is hard. I have listened many women, many friends here in Brazil saying that they are working much more now because of the COVID, and because they have to do everything to the house, and all these hygiene things that you have to wash everything that comes from the supermarket and everything. So it is never ending, because you have to be careful with everything.
Hey guys and gals, that's the end of part 1. Tune in later this week to hear the rest of the episode. Make sure to join our new Facebook group, where we'll be posting some episode discussion and even running some giveaways. So get in on the action by clicking the link in the description. That's enough of me, and I'll see you next time.